Looks like we've got a couple of attendees here in Zoom, and as well, we'll have some on Facebook Live. So wherever you're tuning in from, hello. My name is Matthew Garrett. I'm an SEO strategist here at Thrive Internet Marketing, and I have put together a presentation on how to optimize your website and your web assets for search intent. It's something that I've done an extensive amount of work on and really passionate about it. And we're just gonna dive right into the topic and see what's kind of we'll have some examples and some history and some use cases. There's going to be a couple of Q&A sessions in the middle of it. If you're on Zoom, then there'll be an option for Q&A. So feel free to enter your questions kind of in there, and we'll kind of address them as we go through the presentation. Every time there'll be a screen for a Q&A part, we'll go ahead and review the questions then. And at the very end, we'll have plenty of opportunity for Q&A as well. We do have, I believe, a full hour. The presentation itself should only go for about 20 to 30 minutes. And then everything else will be kind of a free space for Q&A. My friend Aaron is going to be helping with the Facebook side. He'll be forwarding questions to me directly from Facebook Live. So if you're tuning in on Facebook Live, your questions still will be answered. But we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So we're going to be talking about how to optimize for search intent today. And just a little bit about myself before we get in here. So my name, again, is Matthew Garrett. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been doing SEO since 2013, so about 7 years now. I had a bachelor's in new media marketing. I've lived all up and down the East Coast, and I've been with Thrive for 2 years. So I've managed SEO and digital marketing campaigns from so many different types of companies, including massive New York City hospital systems to e-commerce software companies to mom and pop florist shops and around 1,000 different local businesses. And a lot of my specialty kind of comes in with marketing engineering, some technical SEO, and performance-based solutions. And that's kind of what we'll be talking about today as we get into the topic of search query optimization and search intent optimization. So first and foremost, I wanted to kind of start with the base concept that search, like Google and Bing, is really an applied social science. It's applied sociology and it's applied psychology. Learning from search is learning kind of how the mind works with these types of devices. So the core objective of Google search is to give answers fast. And why is that? Well, psychology shows that most all human decision making is either made to gain pleasure or remove pain. So Google's operation revolves around providing an excellent search experience. And to do that, they need to take tons of user data and process it to make sure that every search provides a desired result. Obviously, if people went to Google and searched for something and didn't get the answer they were looking for, they would leave, and thus they wouldn't use Google anymore. So they need to find all the different connections between content, thought, site experience, and take all of this information, process it, and then produce a desired result. And so this data will help them sell ads, which is their main source of revenue, and basically providing answers is their business model. So from the number of backlinks to the load speed to the age of a domain and its trustworthiness, Google uses thousands of different signals to decide whether a web page answers a user's query in their search engine. So when we look at search, we can break them down into one of basically 3 different types. So the 3 major ones are navigational search queries, or Go queries. So this would be something as like typing in a website's brand name or locations of a doctor's office nearby. Informational search queries, or No queries, are things like the symptoms of salmonella or a Joker movie review. Transactional search queries, or Do queries, are things that are like specific product names or maybe like a model number of a device. And then most users are searching to solve a problem or reward themselves. So how does Google and other search engines use and display their data to answer that question? And how, more importantly, can we use that information to process somebody's search query? So let's take a real life example and stop talking so much about the technicalities of the different things. And we're going to look at, this is a search that I produced last year for a blog post that I did on Thrive Agency's website, which is about this whole topic. and I searched the term fantastic beasts. And I thought this was a really good example because at the time, the second movie was just in theaters. There was a first movie already out, and there's books about it. So there's a ton of different things that that one specific search query could mean. So, for instance, while I'm typing this, am I looking for the first movie? Am I looking for the second movie? Maybe I'm looking for showtimes. Am I looking for a member of the cast? Maybe I already seen the first and second movie and now I want to see when a third would be coming out, or maybe I'm trying to buy a book. So Google's going to try its best to show me a little bit of all of those different pieces of information and give me the result that I'm looking for. So when I'm just searching fantastic beasts on desktop, and you'll see that example on the right side of the slide here, there are so many options that come up. So I'll get recent news. I have an information card about the series, Wikipedia article, branded tweets, all within the first display without even having to scroll. So if most users find that they have something to click in that search or that Google answered their question, the search results will continue to appear exactly like this for that specific query because Google's doing its job and provided the answer to the user. If they started searching this query and then maybe researching something else, or they bounce back to this search multiple times, or they go to the second page, or worse, just close out of Google entirely, then Google's rankings and displays for this will change. They have systems of being able to feed back that information and say, okay, this didn't work. What was this user looking for? You know, Google failed its job. The user needed to input additional information to get the answer they were looking for. So let's say my intent was to find showtimes. When I typed Fantastic Beasts into Google last year, I didn't immediately get my answer with this query. So even on mobile search, tickets aren't an option anywhere on the screen. So as a user, I may have a few questions and a few options. There's either one, I can go in and append information to my search query to get a more specific answer. So like Fantastic Beasts 2 tickets or showtimes. I could search something entirely different, like movie theaters near me, or I could use an app that I'm already familiar with. So in this situation, maybe my local movie theater's app or something like Fandango, or I can just give up. So let's take a quick second just to kind of think of applications of what we just learned in the last couple of slides and start getting those gears turning. And can you think of examples of queries that could mean different things to different users? So the same exact text, but two completely different implications. So if you're in Zoom right now, you should be able to either chat in your questions or use the Q&A feature in Zoom to be able to do some questions about this. Or if you're on Facebook, you should be able to just comment on the live feed, and my friend Aaron will forward those questions over to me. So just taking a quick second, the movie theater, I think, is a really good example because typing in anything about a movie is going to generate so much different content that the user may not have actually specified. So grooming, yeah, that's a great example because it could mean dog, human, products, or services. Exactly, right. So if I type in grooming, there's all sorts of different implications of what that might mean. And depending on how kind of search savvy, and I think most people nowadays will use Google and they kind of have an idea and an expected result that if I type in one thing into Google, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get this kind of information back. But that's a perfect example. Yeah, so grooming could mean any sort of number of things. Virus cases, sure, yeah. So depending on if they just type in virus case, there's all sorts of different information that you might be actually looking for specific to either happening with COVID, or I mean, and this is like obviously pretty out of like left field, but if somebody typed in virus cases, they might be looking for like a lunchbox with a picture of a virus on it or something like that. It could be like so wildly different because you have no idea what the user is really searching for. Maps, yeah. So if somebody types in maps, what exactly are they looking for? Are they looking for online maps, or are they looking for something to purchase? Crown, there, yeah, I can imagine there's probably, I think what Crown Royal is like a brand of liquor. Could be a street nearby as well as like a specific object, or even just like who's currently royalty in a certain country or something like that. So those are all really good, strong examples. So let's take a second and break down some of those types of queries. So we have to think about how people search and what they use that information for. So when someone performs a search in Google, what do they want out of that search? What are they trying to get? Generally, we can assume some of the basics, which means they want a quick response time. Because if they wanted to wait for information, then they wouldn't use something immediate like Google. They want trustworthy information. So if the information that they get consistently from Google is incorrect, then they're going to make uninformed decisions, and they're not going to be able to choose the information or like trust the information that they see on Google. So from business hours to maybe medical information, any information that they receive from a Google search, they should trust to be accurate. And Google works really hard on making sure that's the case. And they want detailed information. And this is, this can be taken so many different ways, but people expect to be able to search for information that isn't vague or overly wordy. So it doesn't necessarily mean that detailed is, if somebody's looking up how to make a hot dog, they're not necessarily looking up for like the chemical composition of a hot dog and what the boiling temperature needs to be to cook it and all that. They might be just looking for basic steps. So detailed is kind of situational based on the search, but they want to be able to easily access and read that information that they're looking for. And people are used to convenience and accuracy, especially in the days of mobile. Now people can use voice search to get a lot of information. So that stuff has to be very to the point and accurate. They don't want to have to work to find their answers. And you can ask anybody who works in SEO that people don't always search the entire question. They'll have what we call passive and active intents with their searches. So we have to kind of think critically as people who work on the back end of this, and we're looking at this data. How can we learn from a search query? So these are some of the tools that I think we kind of use more or less every day at looking at that type of information. So Google Webmaster Tools is the most popular one, especially when looking at Google searches. YouTube Analytics is great if you have video content. Bing Webmaster Tools is great for a lot of people who use Windows built-in search. And we can look at the numbers, which can be impressions, clicks, a percentage of click-through rate, and an average rank for any of the search terms that people are looking for inside of these engines, and try to replicate those results. And even though very little search can happen in Bing, there's a lot of insight you can grab from that. Because if somebody's using, integrated Windows search or something, they're searching from their Windows computer or their Microsoft phone or something like that, then you know that a certain part of your demographic uses those devices. So it gives you a lot of insight when you compare it with the other tools where we can see all of this information. And most of these tools are going to show you how many times a search query was used, how many of them resulted in a click, and at what rate people see it to clicking it. So you can try and search those same things and look at, like just what we did with the Fantastic Beasts search. Look at what appears. How do the pages get displayed? What other information is present? And if you're a business owner, what are your competitors doing in that same search space? So studying those results can get you all sorts of new insights into how people find you, and breaks you away from any biased thinking about how people use search. So a lot of people that go in and assume that a user may search air conditioning repair near them, but they could do HVAC near them, and you won't know exactly what search queries they're looking for to try to find you until you look at the actual raw data coming in. So we're going to take another second here to apply some of that thinking again. What do you use to get insights into your potential clients' needs? So not even just search tools and things like I was listing with Google Webmaster Tools, but how do you put yourself in the feet of, or the shoes of your users, and how do you think that they find you? So this could be anything from, loyal customers who have been word of mouth customers for 10 years to someone who just moved to a city and is searching for a local service that you offer. How do you understand their needs? So yeah, using the acquisitions and queries in Google Analytics that's a great start, and it gives you all of that information into what people are searching in Google Webmaster Tools to pull up your site. And there's a lot of information that you can glean on how they interact with the site afterwards, which can be really helpful as well. That's a great example. Thanks, Andy. If we don't have a couple of other ones, I'll list a few that I've had experience with clients that I've worked with. Is a lot of them will ask, just plain word of mouth when they get a new client, how they found them. and what made them choose their business, which I think is an excellent resource. Just get it straight from the user's mouth and figure out what was important to them when making that decision. And then logging that information can be very helpful over the course of, hundreds of customers later, what really made them choose your business. Or even if you somehow can get somebody, like say if you have an email sign up and then somebody chooses not to go with your business for a certain type of job or maybe a product, asking them what made them choose someone else can also be just as resourceful. Call tracking numbers on marketing materials, print, web, paid media, social. Yeah, that can be excellent too, because a lot of call tracking metrics, you can get information about where people are calling from. So if you're doing radio advertising or billboard advertising, seeing the pockets by which people, like different neighborhoods that might be calling you, or people from different areas that are calling you. And when you go to web, even things like Google My Business, you can put call tracking numbers on there and get all sorts of different insights into how people came to that listing and what they were looking for through those same call tracking metrics. We use a couple of different call tracking tools, and they've all been really, really sourceful for that. All right, if you have more ideas of this, feel free to log them down, but I'm going to keep going with the presentation, and we can always come back to this if people have more. So when I try to think of somebody who is doing a good job with search, think again that when people are looking to search, they're looking to either solve a problem or reward themselves in some way, relieve pain. So really, to win in search, you need to be a problem solver. You need to take people's questions and all their queries and answer them. So let's dissect some intent from these queries and kind of look at the usage of them. So earlier in the presentation, I talked about the difference between an active and a passive query. So when people search, they don't always search for their entire query. They'll sometimes just put in little pieces of information. Sometimes they'll put in everything, but more often than not, they'll just use an active query. So something, a small snippet. Whereas they'll have private preferences hidden in their own mind, and you can't get everything from the keywords from research. Going into Google Search Console or the queries report in Google Analytics, you're not going to be able to get into the heads of all of your searchers. There's a lot of hidden intents or passive queries, things that aren't always publicly shown, that are locked behind people's preferences. So on the side here, I have an example of me looking for vegan food in Atlanta, and you'll see the different search results that come up. There'll be a couple of organic listings and a couple of maps listings. And there's a couple of different things that we can look into for vegan food, and you can see it right in Search Console, in Google My Business, as they have different little dollar amounts. Are they closed? Because those are pieces of information that Google's found over time are valuable to show to people. Because if something is closed, vegan food Atlanta, maybe I want to find a restaurant for tomorrow, but I'm probably trying to find food for today. So if it's closed, I can't order from them. So those are just some things to think about when people have these intents in the backs of their heads. How can you satisfy that information without them explicitly asking for it? So again, we'll just take a quick second for some application. If you have some examples of maybe a hidden intent in your industry, so if you work in remodeling, a lot of people will search for cheap, but they may not search for good. And if you're looking for a good remodeling company, like they're going to expect that any company is going to be good. So how do you explain that information without having a search query for it? How do you present to them that you're trustworthy and that your information is detailed and people can know what to expect from the experience of finding you in Google, going onto your website, working with you, and eventually having an end result? So just take some notes of maybe some hidden intents that you can think of in the industry that you work in, whether it be something about cost, availability, maybe even a product type. Like if you're looking for computer repair, does that mean Mac or PC? Sometimes people won't type that information in. Do you do both? Do people ask about it? Things like that are really good examples, and just kind of think of some of those and take that information, and we're going to start applying it as we go through the rest of the presentation. So like I said earlier, we have to optimize for the seen and the unseen to capture that traffic, to capture that click-through rate in Google. So when people don't say what they mean, how can we learn their preferences and how can we be receptive to their needs? So like I said in the last one, let's think about food options, or even you could think about insurance options, or maybe even religious requirements based on what you're selling. So if you think about different cultures or languages or relationship statuses, each of those things will present a passive intent that aren't reflected in the query. So if somebody's looking for food near them, but maybe they don't eat beef products, then does your menu at your restaurant show options for people who don't eat beef? Or maybe they are lactose intolerant. Do you show which products have dairy in them? So on and so forth. Is this food halal? So like examples like that are really good for food, but even with insurance, or think about like religious requirement is something that, depending on what pocket of America or the world that you're in, can be incredibly important. And then think about how people use different tools to access those searches. If they're using mobile versus desktop, or if they're using voice like an Alexa or a HomePod, how do they get information out of those? So the big optimization here is to try to just solve problems online. So when you're writing your content on your site, you have to make sure that you're detailed with the information displayed. And that's not even just on your website, but on other apps and networks as well, like Yelp and Google My Business, making sure that all of your information is correct and as detailed as possible without being overly wordy. So if you run your business by yourself, if you're a solo entrepreneur, you may have biases or preferences that you don't even realize. You may not understand what users are looking for. So what information can you provide, and where can you provide that? How can you solve the user's problem? Because your content exists beyond your website. It's, again, like I said, your Yelp, your Foursquare listings. How detailed are they? Are there pictures available? Is everything on brand? And depending on your service, there's probably other directories that you may already rank for in Google that you can already work with that you don't even know exist. So thinking about third-party services is another way of being able to look at how you solve people's problems online. Yeah, so we just had a question in from, or a comment from Sandy, that she works in veterinary industry, and that you wouldn't believe how many vet websites don't tell you on the homepage what types of pets they treat. That's a perfect example. Is if you'd think like, oh, I want to rank for vets near me, well, you might need to find somebody who's a cat specialist. Or I know I've worked with some vets in upstate New York that, in the more rural areas, that need to be able to treat horses and things like that. And if you don't have that information on your website, you will never capture all of the searchers looking for that, because people may have very specific questions about, maybe like right now, one of my pets is actually ill, and I had to find a vet near me that did work with cats with asthma. So that's a really good example, is like trying to answer what perfect like detail you could add without being overly wordy. And so here's a list of some of the things that I use with almost every client every day that I work with. So these are just optimizations for making your website an asset for solving problems. So 1, build pages that confirm users' explicit and implicit questions. I'm going to keep going back to that restaurant one because I just think that's a really good example. But if your menu only shows the title of what the entree is and the price, there's so much more that you could list that would be easy to explain to a user what it means. So having your options for dairy-free, having vegan options, halal options, meat-free, keto, there's all sorts of different dietary preferences. And I guarantee you there are searchers in your area that are looking for food that fits their diet. They're not just looking for restaurants near me, and you're leaving a lot of that on the table. Make content informative and balance detail with conciseness. So I think I have it somewhere in this presentation, but just in case I don't, when you write stuff online, we try to write stuff to make it that a third grader could read and understand it, because that works the best for web content. Like 9 times out of 10, if information is digestible, people will use it better. Then we can use tools, and we learn from users' experience using CRO tools and questionnaires, asking how people came to the site. looking at live sessions of what people did with their mouse, or maybe when somebody fills out a form on the site, studying where they came from to understand the user's journey better, and then optimizing the content and the experience for those people. And you should always be trying to be trying new things and adding new information. Some of those same search queries. So if we're looking for maybe vets that treat horses in upstate New York, people probably would go 200 miles if they needed to for an important, an important family animal. And if there's so many different competitors, you should be looking at what they're doing. And if they outrank you in Google, try to figure out why that is. If they have better content or a better user experience, they're more likely to outrank you. Or if they've been around longer, and just understanding what those hurdles are and being able to slowly assess and work on them can be incredibly beneficial. Make sure that users can find answers to their questions quickly by having things like FAQs, tables of content, precise navigation. Your menus should be easy to work with, and having FAQs is a great way to generate a lot of content. You can have questions directly there. That's the whole point of Google, right? Is when people go in, they're looking for how to treat a migraine. If you have an article about headaches and you can put an FAQ in, it's like, how do you treat migraines? Boom, there you go. You exactly match their question. Now you're eligible to rank for it. You have to have compelling titles and meta descriptions for all of your pages. If your page is important to Google, that title should match what people are looking for. And your meta description should be the thing that invites them in and says, like, again, let's go do something about food. And if you have a menu somewhere, you can't just say, restaurant name menu. You have to say restaurant name is, a restaurant in blah, blah, blah in this location with offerings of vegan food, keto food, diet food, or steak, or whatever you want to list, whatever is your big, value proposition, listing those things right up front to convince people to come in. Make sure your information is correct across all networks. This is a huge one that people don't realize, is you have business listings on so many networks that, I mean, 300-400 of them. If you've been in business for 5 years, I guarantee there's 400 different networks that have business information of yours. I will still get calls from New York City, and I have not lived there in years because somewhere, somehow, some way, somebody found my phone number in a business listing in New York City. And you have to stay up to date with it. You have to look up your old information. You have to use and hire people that know how to manage those citations. Because if I go on Yelp and I see that you're open 25 miles away and I drive out there and you are closed, I will not go back to that business because I can't trust that your information is correct. And avoid concealing information behind a login or a paywall. A lot of the times, and we'll see this more with things like very technical networks or forums and things like that, but when we're going to look at information, if you have pop-ups or anything that blocks Google from seeing that content or a user from seeing that content, sometimes your business model requires a paywall. News networks specifically, that's your business model. Can't really do much about it. But you should try to get as much information to be as transparent as possible and try to avoid logins or paywalls where you can. And most importantly, you want to make information accessible, simple, and digestible. If people are blind, can they use a screen reader to read your site? If not, you're missing out on people in your area. If it's too overly wordy, maybe somebody doesn't speak English as a first language, maybe it's their second or third language, and if your site is in really wordy English, it may be really difficult for them to read or understand it, or they might not be able to use translation tools, so you're losing people there as well. So just think about those things when you're going through and figuring out, okay, what can I do to help improve my site's performance? It's just being able to answer more people's questions about what you offer. So with our final Q&A is our last application of what questions does your business answer? So what problems do you solve? And this can be, kind of as meta as you want it to be. But some people, for instance, I used an example of McDonald's when I was writing the article, that McDonald's isn't just a restaurant, it's something that is consistent, like if I go to a McDonald's up the road from here in North Atlanta, and then I go to one in Missouri, I'm going to get almost exactly the same hamburger for almost exactly the same price. So it's not just that I sell food, it's that I sell consistent food for cheap almost everywhere. So to try to think about what question your business solves, what problems do you solve, and what is your kind of proposition to the world? What is your role as a business to your community or to your customer base? So those are some good examples of things to kind of think about when we're going through and optimizing our content and working through our listings. And that's going to conclude the presentation, give you guys a lot of stuff to chew on and think about for a while. If we had any questions from Facebook Live, I haven't received any, so I'm not sure if anything came through, or maybe I'm having a chat problem or something. But for those of you in Zoom, if you have any kind of questions about maybe specific use cases or some of the Q&As that we've gone through the presentation for, this would be the time to ask. And if you'd like me to take maybe a look at what you're working with and help you kind of generate some ideas, or you would like to receive a copy of this presentation or more information about how you can optimize for search intent, you can follow up with me by sending me an email at matt.garrett@thriveagency.com, or you can drop your email in the Zoom chat, and you will be able to get to you and give you a PDF copy of this presentation, as well as a copy of the recording of the presentation. So, all right, thank you. I see some email coming in. And so I would encourage you, if you're a business owner or if you're a marketing person at a business, to really think more about what your role in like society is. And I know that's like a very like, whoa, man, kind of response. But if you start thinking about that, you will quickly start coming to conclusions about what kind of copy that you can start writing for your site, for your social media, for your listings, for everything, and putting all of that information together and providing all of your users, whether they're lifetime customers or a new customer, you'll be able to give them so much more value, and you will look so much better than your competition. All right, so a bunch of emails coming through. Perfect. All right, well, I want to thank you guys all for taking some time out of your day to listen to me talk about stats and numbers and psychological theory. This is stuff that I love doing, absolutely love it. And it's really exciting for me to be able to present this information. And thank you to Aaron and Thrive for allowing me to give this presentation. And if we have any ongoing questions, oh, here we got, sorry, questions coming. A lot of pet services like boarding, but people don't search for pet boarding and pet grooming. They're searching for dog boarding or cat grooming. Should there be separate pages for each, or should we just deal with it in the FAQ? I find that you want to make sure that you don't make too many pages. So it would seem to me like you can basically go one of two ways with your site. You can either say, here's services for cats, and here's services for dogs. So, like vet.com/cat, vet.com/dog, or you can do vet.com/boarding. And then within that content, you can put, boarding for cats, boarding for dogs, as long as your navigation makes sense. And depending on how big, your service area is, like if you're talking like a international corporate, maybe chain of vets, then I would go for a more detailed and more organized fashion. But it's very likely that you could probably just do /boarding and then put information about cats and dogs on the same page, and just make sure that at the very top, like if I'm looking on a cell phone, I should see like 2 buttons that says cat boarding, dog boarding, and it just scrolls down to that part of the site. As long as if people can use it, then that's usually the best way to kind of gauge if it's working. Let's see, and I saw 2 Q&As come through. So we'll go ahead and I haven't used the Q&A section in Zoom, so I'm going to hit this button that says Answer Live, and we'll see what this does. So I'm not sure if you guys can see the question or something on the screen, but for the sake of trying it out, we got a question from Alex that says, this may be outside the scope, so ignore if needed, but when it comes to SEO, the world seems to always be changing. Yesterday, keywords were #1 importance, and today they say the sitemap is the most important. From an overall perspective, what is the most important areas to focus on to improve SEO and DA? And DA is a domain authority. So I'd like to think that based especially on my presentation, but I do live and breathe that every day, that the most important area, especially for timelessness of search engine optimization, the really big thing that your business should focus on is answering questions. Ultimately, it may not get you to rank 1 immediately, but it will allow people with multiple types of queries to find you, and it will allow you to focus more on the user's experience. And if you have more people having a good time on your website and going through the process and converting successfully, it's painless for them, then you will see ranks come along with that. And as far as domain authority goes, if you have an interesting value proposition, then you can talk, especially right now, because a lot of people aren't really back in the office. Publications are looking for stories. Go get press, go get talked about. If you have something interesting that you can talk about, and it could be anything from, if you are a florist who cannot sell flowers right now because farming is difficult, and who's buying flowers at a time where we're all kind of stuck inside, what can you do to help your community? And you can go take that story to local publications and get them to write about it and give you links. Links are super important when it comes to domain authority, and being a part of your community will earn you organic links very, very quickly. And we have another question here that says, what's the recommended frequency of adding blogs to a business website? I am sometimes on the fence about this. It is very situational. So blogs add a lot of value if you have something worth writing about. And when it comes to I would say a lot of websites don't necessarily require a blog. And a lot of blog type articles, like how do I fix XYZ, can sometimes be used in things like FAQs or service pages. But if you have enough to talk about, if you think that, let's say, again, we'll use our fake computer repair business. A blog would be a great spot to talk about security vulnerabilities that you've seen, or maybe writing articles about how to clean your computers at home as best as you can, and then putting calls to action like, hey, if this is too much for you, contact me. So there's always an example. I think pretty much anybody can start a publication nowadays. If you don't think that your blog can necessarily be, a resource for people to learn about things, then sometimes that information and that salesy type of copy can go better in an FAQ or on a service page. But it's very situational. So sometimes, you can make blogs work really well. Sometimes you can't. All right, I think that's all the Q&A, and I think I may have had one more chat. All right, it's just the preferring concise pages with info. Yeah, I think that answering questions comes in a lot of different forms. So sometimes it's better to make blog posts for it. Sometimes it's better to make pages for it. And it really kind of comes with how the website flows. And it depends on how much you can talk about. So if you're working in the veterinary industry, if you have somebody on staff who's dedicated enough to be able to write blogs once every 2 weeks about things that they've seen or things that they've learned, how to, save people from ticks and things like that, then go for it. Absolutely go for it. But when it comes to maybe something like how-to guides or quick questions, like, do you offer plumbing in Birmingham, Alabama? Probably less important to put that on a blog, and probably more important to put that on a service page. All right, so I don't see any more questions, and I don't see any new chats. So I will go ahead and bid you all adieu. And for those of you that have put in an email address in the chat here, we will follow up with a copy of the presentation, both the recorded version and a PDF. so that you can review it and maybe review it with people at your company or just think about it. And again, my email is right there. That goes straight to my inbox. So if you have questions about, more specifics and things like that, feel free to email me, and we can think about it together.